My name is Rob Sentz. I'm the innovation officer at a company called Emsi. Emsi is a labor market analytics firm that's focused on kind of a lot of things, but the big thing that we've done for the past 20 years is take data from a lot of external sources, so the government, job postings and resumes and profiles, and turn that into data that you can use to better understand a wide variety of workforce issues. So it's all data that comes from the outside world that you can use to better understand something like the economy, the education landscape around yourselves, and more your own workforce. I talk a lot about these type of topics in a lot of different settings, but what I want to do today is, this is sort of new for me, is I want to introduce you to an idea that's sort of moving from this high-level perspective about the economy that we use for, with labor market data, all the way down to right down to the ground to the individual level skill. And we have some theories and ideas for the importance of this. At the end, I'm going to give you kind of a free resource that I want you to try out. Okay, so the skills is what we want to talk about, and the way that we're thinking about skills and the importance of it, it's sort of a buzzword that a lot of people throw around, but the importance of it is that it is an artifact, a thing that we can actually use to translate between three very disparate areas of communication. Emsi's mission, so we've been around for about 20 years. We're based in the Pacific Northwest. We started out in higher education, but we've really migrated towards communities, so workforce and economic development, and then most recently into the world of people analytics, talent analytics, recruiting, and site selection. All these areas need data about the economy to work better. So our mission is to use data, in particular labor market data, to inform and connect people, education, and work. People, education, and employers. This is the data that we work with. We work with job postings that come from you, companies that are out there making them. We work with labor market information that comes from the government. We work with resumes and profiles, which come from people. And then another thing that ties us all together is actual compensation information, how much companies are willing to pay. I thought this was good. Josh published this fairly recently, thinking about this whole idea of skills. He was talking about all the emergent technology around Skills Cloud. And what he said is, in today's world of work, jobs are changing so quickly that the old-fashioned idea of building competency model and former job descriptions is not keeping up, right? So we all know that if you just go out and make a job posting, let's say for something like data science or cybersecurity, you often have a really hard time with that kind of job posting. And what you'll find too is the more that you load it up, let's say you have your data scientists write that job posting, right? And maybe it's like this, where 3 or 4 of them get around a table and they sort of curate all the things they've done, right? I have 10 years of experience, I have 5-year experience, I have 12 years of experience, and they start throwing random skills into, I worked with Ember, I have this. And they start to throw it all together and they give it to the folks that are going to post the jobs. You have a $600,000 job posting because it's so full of so much stuff. And so what we know is just doing that doesn't really work, right? So companies, systems that can continuously identify skills that drive success, organize and arrange these skills so people can find them, and systems that help individuals and managers develop themselves for skills of the future. We know today, for instance, if you just post for cybersecurity skills, you're not going to find them. Oh, well, you can if you're willing to pay for them a lot. But what we know we need to do is build them more than we need to just buy them, right? And so Josh is keying in on this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works. I talk about data, but I am not myself a data wonk. My job is to actually communicate data to other non-data wonks. It's okay if you're a data wonk, though. But the best way to think about it, we get into the minutiae of data and the complexity of it, but we have to keep this in mind. The reason we do it is it's a communication apparatus to help us deal with the economic situation that confronts us, which is this idea of disjointedness between these 3 critical sectors. And if you think about these 2 right here, right, we talk a lot about work, and we talk a lot about education and how those 2 need to be able to talk to each other more. The other compounding factor here is that the home ecosystem is one that we actually have to think about. Al referenced, dedication to family. That's actually been a huge theme in the news with Kobe's passing, right? How dedicated he was to his family and how much he oriented to that. And what we see is your family ecosystem, the way you communicate in your family. The United States is also pretty fascinating because it is the coming together of so many different places, races and cultures all in one place. We have so many different languages and things that are rich and developed at home, and those don't naturally translate into the world of work, and then the other one, the world of education. So what we're trying to do is often align three planets that are completely dissimilar in terms of their language. It's not that they don't want to talk to each other, they don't really know how, right? It's not to pit one of these against each other. They struggle to actually communicate with each other. The language of your home is usually different than the language of work and usually different than the language of education, right? So it's not an Uber or an Amazon type problem. It's not an eHarmony problem where you just have to get one person from this place to this place or one person to meet this person, right? It's not that simple. And that's why I think the data matters so much. We have a villain when we do this sort of movement, right? People struggle to find work and work struggles to find people. In your organization, if you were to cast your organization as a hero, if HR is trying to be a hero, the job is to confront this type of problem. And why do we have it? People lack information. They don't know how to speak the language, right? Organizations that are on the front lines of doing this work are often perceived as being worthless. That could be an HR department. That could be a college trying to upskill people. That could be some sort of government agency, a workforce board. They often are perceived as not being able to do it. But what we're seeing today is the era of information is changing this rapidly. And that's why we have lots of conferences that we go to and try to figure out how to deal with these things. So what we're actually after is this idea of an integrated, aligned economic ecosystem where essentially there's your eHarmony problem right there. People in work trying to talk to each other, their labor market eHarmony problem. And what we introduce to this is because we live in such a knowledge and skills-based economy, we necessitate some sort of post-secondary or higher level education. This is true of pretty much every sector, right? Even manufacturing, you can't just walk in off the street these days and go into manufacturing. You have to bring a lot of skills, background, and so on. So you could swap out training for my higher ed circle there. So this is the thing we're trying to do with data, and we're trying to find those center points where these things overlap, and we can help them talk to each other better. Now, to make it a little bit more complex, this all happens in the context of a place, right? And when we get into place-based work, it blows up even more because we have places in our country that are as big as countries. New York City's economy is economically as big as Canada, right? And here we are in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is, Al referred to it in the beginning. This is the capital of the world for technology. This is a country in and of itself economically, right? And everybody thinks of California that way, right? It's the 7th biggest economy in the world if it was just its own country. So to do this in the context of a place makes it all the more difficult. So what does it mean? There's not too few opportunities out there, there's too many. And we have to be able to help people translate that. And ultimately, to simplify it, it really is a demand and supply problem. How do we help bridge these gaps for people and work? All right, so let's keep those circles in mind. How do we actually think about this? How should we look at it? Well, if you just try to get one person, one job from one school or something like that, that kind of scales, right? But when you're trying to do it by thousands, it doesn't scale at all. And that's, again, why we have to use data. People create information about themselves, resumes and profiles. Businesses create information about themselves, their job postings. Schools create information about themselves, their curriculum. So there's those three wildly unstructured data sets that we have to start to use to help them connect. Furthermore, we have the regional economy itself, the place, San Francisco, that has a lot of data about itself. So those are the things we're trying to align, and we can use the data to help align it. People are the supply, and from the people we can understand these critical components. Where they live, who they work for, their jobs, skills, and education, and so on. We can understand that similarly from the employer perspective, what they're looking for. You're all familiar with this, right? Where they are, what skills they're looking for. more and more what we have to do is be able to integrate the actual training and education from places into this framework, which we're doing. And that's the courses, the skills and knowledge. More and more what we're doing is turning curriculum into this language, which has never happened. We have to translate curriculum back over to that demand side. And then we have to contextualize it in the economy itself. Because what's needed, even in the north part of California, from a technology point of view or from manufacturing or anything, it can actually look extremely different than what's needed in this other part of the state. It's quite dramatic. All right, so this is the framework that I would use to think about this problem. We're always trying to connect people, education, and work, and what we need to do is create a common language that brings them together. And we want skills to be that language. We think skills can be that thing. We have to define a skill. What in the world do we mean by skill? It's going to become, it probably already is, somewhat of a buzzword. So let's define it, right? It's a word that communicates value and is used consistently between these three things: companies and their postings, people at work, and education in their curriculum. It's that simple. It's very hard to translate these documents back and forth to each other. It's very hard for you, if you're in the world of HR, to go talk to, for instance, a community college about their curriculum. But when you get down to a skills level, you all of a sudden start to find, oh, we use that word, we use that word. That word's valuable to us. We teach that word. Now we can actually start to get on the same page. Or a person can do the same thing. So here's three things you need to know about skills. And this is coming from research that we've been doing for the past couple of years. We've been publishing a lot of skills-based research projects. And here's three things. The first thing that we found is they cluster and create shapes. So when we think about data, a lot of times it's like what we have on the left. We try to put it in a spreadsheet, right? And the spreadsheet has sort of this hierarchy to it. We have here, you might be looking for something like life sciences. And that goes all the way down to something like a microbiologist. And that's been sort of the limit of taxonomic data. But when you look at actual job postings, or if you look at people's resumes, or even if you look at curriculum, it looks far more like what you see on the right. It's a cluster of information. And we know that idea, right? Things cluster. What is Palo Alto? What's a cluster of people with very similar skills and companies that are all doing a lot of the same kind of thing. And so what we see when we look at skills information is it actually clusters, and it's way more like reality. A skill usually doesn't sit in isolation. It usually is grouped with other skills. Okay, so that's the first thing. People have shapes, companies have shapes, regions have shapes. They describe work a lot more accurately. Look, the chart on the left, this one, doesn't really describe work. It's less complex, but it doesn't really describe what work is. The one on the right does. All right, so what we found in the data, and this is also kind of interesting too, is what do people do with their degrees? So if you have a degree in English, what in the world do you do? Right? Well, most people say you're a teacher or you're a barista. Well, is that true? Right? Education to work is nonlinear. I'll show you in a second. Skills gives us a better way to translate that, which I've said. The common language helps connect those important documents. So if we look at something like, we did some research on the liberal arts. I bet a bunch of you have liberal arts degrees. I do. What you'll find is, for instance, if you have a liberal arts degree, chances are you're probably not a barista. Chances are you probably started in a sales job. And so what we did here is we looked at the first, second, and third job for people with liberal arts degrees, and we found that they start in sales, but what was really interesting to us is how much of them group into the area of marketing over time. So by the third job, it's their biggest job is marketing, PR, and advertising, right? So that was kind of interesting to us. So we can actually start to see the flows of work and then what people do with degrees. We then compared all the different types of degrees out there, the big ones, right? There's your language philosophy, that's your English majors, social science, business, communications, engineering, and IT, and we said, what do they do? And what we found is, over time, what they do is they go into major business functions, and we looked at the major business functions they actually do. So we went down a little lower, and what we found is they're generally doing four things: tactical communication and strategic communication, operational oversight, and interpersonal oversight. So it's that chart in the middle. 54% of all grads go into these major business functions. What do I mean by tactical communication? Sales. What do I mean by strategic communication? Marketing. What do I mean by operational oversight? HR, finance, all the systems. What do I mean by interpersonal oversight? Management. Chances are, if you're an engineer at your first job, by your second and third job, what are you going to be? Manager. You're not doing engineering anymore. You're managing people, right? That's very, very common, and the data bears it out. And so what we want to do is break out the outcomes. So here's the outcomes of social science grads, and you can see their flows over time. But what we also have to do is get down below that, and we have to say, what are they actually doing? And these are the 4 key themes. So it's not the job they do, it's the actual skills they're employing. This data gets quite complex when you really dig into it, so we try to simplify it in a sort of a 2-dimensional chart. The data is very 3-dimensional when you look at it. But these are the 4 themes of social science grads. Sales is their strongest theme. Social services, no surprises, is the second, and you can see some of the skills there: psychiatry, behavioral health, mental health. The third is digital marketing, search engine optimization, forecasting, Google Analytics, and then the final theme is business and financial analysis. So why do you have such different themes? Well, there's a bunch of different majors in there, right? You have your econ majors and your psychiatry majors in there, but these are the actual things that people do with those degrees from a work perspective. You can do, and it's interesting on that one because that's a really non-applied degree, right? That's like the whipping boy of degrees. What are you going to do with that? Well, probably a lot of SEO, forecasting, behavioral health. Those are all big things in the economy. Okay? And all of a sudden, there starts to be a skill. There's a language there. If you wonder what people do in their jobs, you can see it. If you wonder maybe how we should advertise these jobs or where we should look for that talent, you start to see where degrees can line up to that and vice versa. And then even for people who have those degrees, they can start to better understand where their talents can be used most effectively. Here's another sample from engineering. This is no surprises, right? Their major area is industrial mechanical, but software development really does eat most engineers. It ends up being the area they work in a lot. And then here's their themes of work: product design, quality management, product development, back-end development, and construction. So those are their 5 major skill themes. Okay, so that's nonlinearity. It characterizes work better than just the labor market data itself, the traditional stuff. And skills change, the last one here, I should have a 3 on that, they change dramatically based on where you live. They're shaped by industry activity, and they're shaped by the location. Here, we just published a research project on this. This is looking at digital marketing skills across the country. And what emerged was radical difference based on place. So on the left, in Boise, what you'll see is the cluster of skills for digital marketing is driven, these are the most important things, the things that were most statistically significant when we looked at all the activity there, was graphic design, SEO, user experience, and web development. And it's not just the skills themselves, it's how they emerge based on different styles of work. So art direction was super important in Boise, as were the IT math skills related to SEO. But then everything else was more business-oriented skills like user experience and web development, okay? What does that mean? Well, when you contrast it to Atlanta, you have a very different cluster for marketing. So what's the implication of this? How you would look for talent changes based on where you are. So if you're going to do ads in a specific place, it's good to know what skills are clustering there. It's good to know what other companies are looking for and what talent people actually have. So let's say, for instance, it's also not to say that Atlanta doesn't need graphic design. It's that graphic design is so much more pronounced in a place like Boise versus Atlanta. This is more of a language that we're trying to create, okay? This is cybersecurity, one that everybody's struggling with these days. And cyber is really fascinating because we have another research piece coming about this soon, but it is in short supply everywhere. So you're in very much a build versus buy situation with that one. But what we see with it is it does change quite dramatically. Now what you'll see here is much of the skills are IT and math, but then you also see some other things emerge. You see military skills. There's a lot of certifications associated with this one. In Columbus, you see business skills like incident response show up. Washington, D.C. has by far the most pronounced big one, but then we see these other really fascinating clusters pop up, like in St. Louis and Columbus. So again, trying to create a language that makes it easier to understand those places, easier to communicate with people about what needs to be done, easier to communicate even back in education about what's truly important in those places and what needs to be taught. All right, let's think about 3 applications, and then I'll open up for some questions. The first thing that we've done, we've released a little piece and prototype on this, is to actually start to write way better job postings because you can signal skills better. So what we did here is we did a job posting for web developers in Seattle, and what we can do is we just took a job posting and threw it into our prototype. And what it does is it starts to auto tag all the skills that come out of it, and it says there's about 8,000 people, given the skills that we put in our job posting, that have those skills, okay? The next thing we did is we started to deselect, or we started to add some new skills to it. So we had about 8,000, and then we started to say, let's add some other skills. We added Node, and then now we have 400 people who have it. You can see how that works. Cascading style sheets, JavaScript, PHP. The more skills you add, the lower your candidate pool actually goes. And to actually be able to see that is pretty valuable because you know it goes back to the 5 people creating that cybersecurity job posting. They just added 85 skills to that thing, and there's literally 5 people in your whole economy that qualify for it, right? So maybe let's back out some of those skills, and all of a sudden we might get some more traction with that. So now what we can do is even go in a little further and actually start to look at some of those specific skills that are important to us as a company, but we might be able to look at them and say, oh, there's just not as much out there if we include that one. And that goes into maybe we need to start to develop that ourselves a little bit more, or maybe we should back it out and hire people anyway and then teach them later, because we're just not going to get as many candidates. That's one, write way smarter job postings. 2, create better, more data-informed talent strategies. Skills gives you granularity that you can use to communicate, decide, and build with. This is looking at Citigroup's job postings for a few quarters since 2018, the end of 2018. And what we can see through Citigroup's job postings is generally management's the most important thing. That's probably the thing they're having the hardest time finding, and then business and financial operations. And you see this kind of barred, steady flow. But when we get into actual skills, it goes all crazy, right? What their skill needs are change dramatically, even quarter to quarter. Like right now, self-service technologies is the #1 thing they're posting for, and that didn't even exist in between April 2019 and June. And now it's like top on their list. So again, this analysis helps you get to a more granular level that you can use to communicate. And again, if you're having a hard time, like if they're having a hard time finding management or business and financial operations people, but so much of what they're looking for are things like risk management and self-service technologies, that translates at a level that you can look for it more intelligently. You can look for it out of curriculum. You can look for it out of other talent in the region. You can go to other regions and look for it. Just a way more intelligent, language-based way of looking for things. And then the big thing that we're trying to do now, and what we're hearing from a lot of companies, and it's very common, right? If you're a big company and you're posting for something like cyber or risk analysis, what will you typically do? Or some sort of skill, right? You'll post out in the open market for it, and you generally start to compete with other companies for that talent, even for their own employees. But the thing you might need to start to do is say, do we have 5 people in our company that we could spend way less money and just upskill or reskill into those positions? And that's sort of the theme. How do you do that? So what we have to do is start to read the skills in your own company, what's embedded in your own workforce. You have 30,000 employees. Mark Hansen, my colleague here, used to work with United Healthcare. Something about 500,000 employees. How in the world do you understand your own skills so that you can start to refine them and move them in better ways? So what we're talking about here is is hooking up our skills, Emsi skills, which I'll show you in a second, to your own ATS so you can understand the shape of your own company. And it looks something like this. We looked at, I think this is Medtronic. We looked at their work between Minnesota and San Diego, and it was dramatically different. It's just the same exact industry in two different places, and they're doing very different things in two different places. In Minnesota, they're doing a lot more of the industrial mechanical engineering, and you can see the skills that they're doing there. Whereas, we'll go to the next one. Whereas in San Diego, they're doing a lot more of their software and their life sciences. So this is the shape of the industry, the shape of a company, and it changes dramatically based on where you are, but we can see at their headcount and what they're actually doing and what they're probably struggling to develop more and more. So again, skills is the way that we want to do it, okay? And again, what's interesting here too, these aren't jobs. This is actually the work they're doing. There's lots of job titles that go into this, right? And companies can call job, they might call it a software engineer one, or whatever they want to call it. They'll call it all kinds of things. But when we get down into this, we can give that company a language they can use to understand their work a lot better, and then get after it in a lot better way. What's also interesting here too is, if you live in Minnesota, we haven't published this yet, but you got to be a little concerned because everybody talks about California losing a lot of talent, right? People are leaving the state and going other places. But what this is signaling to me too is they can't find that talent in Minnesota, so they're not even posting for it anymore. So if I live there, I might need to think about how do I actually develop a little bit more of that to help retain and keep that talent in that company there. That's a side note to this, but this is something we'd love to talk to you about. My colleague Mark's here as well, and it's a big project we're doing to help companies essentially better evaluate their own internal talent. This is the site that we've put out, and I think this is my call to action for you is to check out Emsi Skills. Here's the URL. And what we want to do is allow you to use it for free. So we have 30,000 skills that we've curated from essentially 100 million job postings and 100 million resumes and profiles, and we're updating these skills constantly. So every 2 weeks we update our whole database. We add new ones, take out old ones. We actually allow you to tell us if you think we need to add one or if you think one's dumb. So there's a community aspect to it. And what we're doing now is saying you can go in and take your resumes or job postings or whatever you want to do, and we have some prototypes in there, and you can do 50 free skill tags for anything you want. Just start to throw them in there. And it's kind of like what I showed you. We'll actually help pull out the skills that you're looking for. And then we're working to develop more systems. For instance, what skill actually costs the most money? So we can associate the skills with compensation. So if you have something that you're putting into your posting and you're having a hard time finding it, we would like to turn around and say, oh, it's because that's making your job posting go up $40,000, right? It's hard to know that without getting into the data. So that's my spiel. Please feel free to contact me if you want to talk about it. I'll take a card or anything like that. But yeah, here's the URL again. Try the site out. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to help you. I hope this was helpful. Thanks.
At the end, you alluded to turning on certain skills and seeing that that's added some market premium to the role. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you assess the premium associated with different skills?
Yeah. So what we work with compensation data from government sources. So pretty much every job, when you report your job to the government through your tax documents, the census is coming up. The government tracks that pretty well. So we use that data, plus we have a lot of data from job postings where employers will actually mention compensation associated with a job. And so what we're able to do is through some modeling, actually pick up on which skills are actually driving the wage differentials in the postings. It's not perfect, but we can see based on it's based on how often things show up. It's what the compensation is based on. And there are actually some skills that make your job posting go down, which is kind of interesting too. like WordPress. Will make your job posting go down. Yeah, but then you know if you like Ember, it goes way up, and it's based on a number of people who have it versus don't. So happy to show you a little more.
Thank you. Couple questions. One was, so you had the model up there for one of the companies and looking at how the skills are, was it City? Like,
Yeah.
are you able to do more, are you getting involved with the predictive side of thing of where they, whether it's based on geography or based on skills, where they might need to sort of ramp up and identify where they need to reskill or recognize like
Yeah.
there's just no skill set there and
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a huge aspect
Yeah.
of this. Yeah, and it's the first part of that is cyber is a really good example because we know that the issue with cyber is not the coding and the IT skills, the network system skills. It's the certifications and it's the more proper cyber education. And so let's say you're a company and you've got 15 network people that you're thinking about letting go. Like, we've got a lot more automated systems now. We don't need this much headcount in this area, so we're going to let these 15 people go. Meanwhile, we're trying to hire 15 cyber people over here. Right. What would be smart is to not let them just necessarily go right. and then go hire 15 people from another company. It would be smarter to go, let's get our systems people with the skills they don't have. And it's way cheaper, way more cost effective, but companies have no way of identifying that right now.
And so on that skills site, what's the current breakdown of users and people going on that site between the three different dimensions? I guess there's no education, but I'm curious more on like the end user, right? The people, like how many people are going up there and recognizing that they need to update their resumes according to this common language?
That's a great question. Right now, our focus has generally been more through post-secondary and then the world of people analytics, and then also like cities. But over time, we do have sort of in our backlog of projects building a way better resume builder that's skills-based. But we're not B2C at all. So we think the best way for us to scale our work is to work through organizations that are at scale. So like if it's United Healthcare, they're really at scale. Or Arizona State, they're really at scale. Or Starbucks. I mean, that's I think how we feel like we can affect it better. So it would be by giving the data to those folks who can help their people better.